Join the conversation. Contact the show on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website, Motorsport Radio.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the F1 show. No, I am not Ross. Ross is doing some schoolwork, so I decided to step in for him and pay tribute to his presenting skills. And joining us this week is, of course, Connor, who is regularly on the panel and regularly telling me off for being controversial. But joining me this week as well is none other than the club racing specialist, Mike Seaborn, who drives for the CTRC. And he can lend a bit of more racing knowledge to very limited racing knowledge on Formula One. And this show is going to be basically about the test that wasn't a test, that became quite a competitive test to see how the new cars were tested in non-testing conditions at Barcelona. That's how it's putting it, Connor.
If you'd want to put it that way, then yes, I suppose it is. This, for technical terms, was the shakedown, not the official preseason test, as we have all been got used to at Barcelona. I'm sure that's got nothing to do with, how Bahrain wants the spectacle of being seen as the official preseason test, but we will gloss over that. This, however, was the first time we got to see the new era cars in action. As you say, we have seen a radical shake-up in that Lewis Hamilton is fastest. Perhaps not the most surprising thing. In fairness, though, as always, testing times mean nothing in testing, as we should be brutally aware of by now. There are plenty of other factors to take into account, which I'm sure we will go over in the show, Ross. Not Ross, Josh, of course.
I'm the more handsome one.
Of course, Josh.
Yeah, so as you started with Mercedes, we shall start with Mercedes, who, of course, posted the fastest lap under Lewis Hamilton, who, for a long time, was not really listed as a Formula One driver. Everyone thought he's going to retire and go on with business thing, even though everyone actually knew that he wasn't. And he did all right. I mean, Mike, Lewis Hamilton, you've got to think, is coming back with a vengeance this season. And I think, posting the fastest time, that could be some way to prove that he is meaning business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's as unfeasible as it was to think that Lewis Hamilton might not return. The sheer ridiculousnly of what we saw at the end of last year, I wouldn't have been surprised. It was what a thing to have to, or what a way to end that season. And yes, especially at that age where you could consider him retiring, I wouldn't have been surprised if it had happened. So, but yeah, you've got to bet that he's got to come back with a vengeance. I think, I think exactly as Connor said, I don't know how much you can read into the testing times, but I'd be very, very surprised if those boys at Mercedes have not built a bit of a machine this year. And I think he'll be very switched on to have another tilt the title.
Definitely, and I'm sure we expect a lot of #hammer time to return as Lewis Hamilton goes and tries to destroy everyone else like he did in the last few seasons. But we're not saying that Formula One is going to be very predictable and boring like it was last season, because of course it wasn't last season. But Connor, the obvious big thing was Mercedes are now silver and not black. So now the silver arrows rather than the black arrows. This was not that well received, as I remember.
I think you're trying to stir up controversy here again, my friend. The silver arrows, again, have returned to their classic silver colour. Mercedes did say in that front that they will be championing, you know what I meant to say, advertising more direct approaches to how to, qualify social justice issues, as it were. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of other things we can go on. But of course, in my opinion at least, it's fantastic to see Mercedes back in their classic silver colour for the new era, for the new season, and of course with Hamilton's new teammate George Russell as well, now also adorning the silver that I'm sure he's wanted to adorn for many, many years now.
Definitely, and shows you how popular you are, Mike. The fact that you've only just started your first show and we've already got a comment coming in from Paul Peters, who is a mini moto driver from East Sussex, and Hamilton is going to smash it and win the championship this year. So, as I said, F1 is not predictable in the slightest, yet, by the sounds of it, Hamilton's already going to win the title. But going back to the testing, obviously, Barcelona, in my view, is not the best track to test at because there's not that many slow corners. They weren't using the hairpin. They were using what they did last season, which is that MotoGP circuit. So you didn't have that slow corner. So you're still waiting on those slow corners that we will get in Bahrain. And but it did look like the Mercedes were really, really good. They were consistent. They were reliable. No catastrophic fires, no blow-ups, no nothing. I mean, Connor, how impressed do you think Toto Wolff will be on this brand new Mercedes and the fact they've managed to keep the Mercedes as it was?
I think it's all relative, and I know that's going to sound very, I know that feels like me sitting on the fence a lot, but they completed the second most laps out of any team, 392 laps for reference, and a lot of that was done on the final day. Mercedes ramped up their testing program as the time went on. They started, I could argue, relatively slowly in the first day to make sure there was no problems. And by the end of the third day, they were racking in the laps, with both Russell and Hamilton completing over 100 laps on that final day. There is nothing to suggest there's a major problem with that team. But at the same time, they didn't complete the most amount of laps. And while they did set the fastest lap, there is some caveats to... they only set it on the fastest tyre. Red Bull's quickest time by Perez was on a tyre the stage prior to that. Norris's quickest time was on day 1, not day 3, as Hamilton's was. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion to say that Mercedes have got the best car this year. And I think you would be foolish to suggest, Josh, that we have a one-team walkout again.
I mean, yes, as I keep saying, I know I'm the more handsome one. I know it's hard for you to work it out, but
yes, my apologies.
My name is Josh, but yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and also, obviously, we're talking all about Hamilton at the moment, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. As much as I'd love this show to be entirely Hamilton, there is another Mercedes driver, and no, it is not Valtteri Bottas. It is another British driver, and that is George Russell. Mike, he seemed to fit in to Mercedes quite well, and from what I've seen of the testing, it seems that he's basically doing the same thing that Bottas did, which is not quite be as fast as Hamilton, but be there or thereabouts.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how that develops because as far as I know him, that's not the George Russell that I've seen race. George is going to want to show what he can do, I'm sure. The only fear potentially is that the caveat to him moving up to the big team was that he was going to play second fiddle. It would be a shame to see. It would be a shame to see him sort of held back like that. I think. I would hope that both drivers get given a fair crack of the whip until someone emerges on top. I can't. As long as they are giving an equal footing to play with, I can't see George sitting in Lewis's shadow. I think he's waited a very long time for that seat, and he's going to come out all guns blazing.
So you foresee it being a bit like a Hamilton-Alonso partnership, where they both, well, hopefully not as volcanic, but that sort of side by side battling for the title, championship style sort of thing.
Yeah, well, it's got to be very well managed, and Mercedes is probably the team to manage it. I think Mercedes have a much better handle on their internal affairs than the likes of Ferrari, for example. I think if Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz had been as close as they were last year, but it had been for the top of the tree in the championship, that team would have imploded. Mercedes, on the other hand, they're the picture of stability and of zen and perfect team atmosphere. And but you can't keep two drivers that good down. It's, as I say, my fear is that the reason they've been able to manage the situation is by making it explicitly clear to George that Lewis wants number 8, and you're just going to have to chill your beans for the moment. But my hope is that they've both been told whoever's quickest is going to get the team's backing going forwards. But first, you've got to prove you can be quickest.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And moving on from the Constructors' Championship 2021 to the Drivers' Championship from 2021. And I say that with painfulness because, well, I'm not going to get into it, but as we know, a certain someone caused a certain little bit of controversy last season, and it still hasn't been resolved. And no, I'm not over it. But Red Bull, they were second fastest, and but it wasn't the driver you'd expect to be second fastest, was it, Connor?
Indeed, it was Perez who actually set their benchmark time. But as I said, that's perhaps quite an interesting result, as it were. If we really want to look at the times, which I really don't like to look at the times specifically because of how irrelevant they sometimes end up being, but Perez's quickest time of a 1:19.5 was 0.4 slower than Hamilton, but he set that on the C4 tyre, which should be more than 0.4 slower around Barcelona. Compared to the C5 and C4 tyres, I should say, sorry. And of course, as I said, it's Perez who set the time, not our drivers' champion, Max Verstappen, who honestly didn't, light up the timing screens dramatically during his time, saying that he did complete over 200 laps and was one of only a handful of drivers to do so. Even Hamilton didn't complete over 200 laps over the course of the days. And yeah, it was notable to see, to perhaps see how quickly the Red Bull team and Verstappen are getting on top of this new car. The biggest thing about them is their side pods. Now, I know they're not as dramatically shaped as, say, the Ferrari side pods, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, but the underfloor is producing a lot. At least from the pictures we saw during their wet running, they are producing a lot of underfloor wake, which has allowed them to mostly minimize the porpoising effect. For those that don't know, the porpoising effect is where the cars are effectively bouncing along the straight as the airflow squishes and contracts or expands as the bottom of the car hits the track, which is a major issue this year now that we have ground effects, which of course have been banned in previous years. And Red Bull appear to be getting on top of that, not as much as McLaren. Again, we'll get onto that in a minute, but Red Bull are slowly starting to develop their car in a way that Mercedes haven't outright discredited them. And I think that's always notable when we come out of testing and no team is declared the winner. We've got to the end of testing. Ferrari have completed the most laps. We have McLaren, the only team to finish to solve the porpoising issue. We have Mercedes, who set the quickest time. And of course, we have Red Bull, who shouldn't be discounted and almost certainly didn't show their upper hand. And so you've easily got 4 teams there that have really started to break away from the competition. And as you say, with the Red Bull, there's something to say about a car that did have problems on that first day, because you've got to remember Perez stopped on the first day of testing. He was the guy that brought out the first red flag. Second day of testing, I should say, sorry, because the first day, surprisingly, went off without a hitch, which none of us expected. We all thought it would be like 2014 over again, where everyone failed to even set lap times. But yeah, we've had effectively the top 5 teams run with very minimal issues, and I think that says a lot.
Yes, it does, and this was it. But we have got some breaking news, guys, live on air. How cool is this? Nikita Mazepin will drive for 2022 Formula One Haas team, but he will not be driving under the Russian flag due to the sanctions that have been imposed. And more sanctions have been imposed, but he will be driving under a neutral flag, but he will be driving for Haas. So, Mike, this will obviously come as a shock for a lot of people because of the thing going on. Obviously, without getting too much into it, because this is like motorsport and all this sort of thing, would you say that with what's going on with the sanctions that have been going on towards Russia and all of this, to allow a Russian driver so I'm not going to say has bought his Formula One seat, but has definitely paid a little bit of money into the F1 seat. Do you think it's wise for FIA to allow him to race?
I think we've got to make that separation between politics and sport, and I think it's probably a wise decision by the FIA, almost by letting him drive, but saying you're not going to have a national affiliation. It almost serves to separate the sport from the politics, almost to say, this is not entirely related to what we're doing. And it would have made things awfully complicated for Haas as well, you want to feel, if Nikita wasn't going to drive, because, surely by the way that team functions, there's no doubt that their input, the Mazepins, has kept that team on the grid, and they're probably pretty reliant on having Nikita in the car in terms of financial backing this year. But can I just add, was the disappointment palpable then when we all heard that he was going to be driving? I mean, I could feel it in this room.
I mean, well, for me, I was sitting there going, I expected him to be dropped. Not because obviously he's to blame for it all, but just simply because everyone else, FIFA kicking Russia out of the World Cup and all this sort of thing, everyone is doing, not allowing anyone Russian to compete. And because Mazepin's dad is effectively an oligarch in Russia. Yeah, that's the one. And to me, it seems sort of like, well, that's what they were trying to stop happening in Russia. And the fact that they're allowing Mazepin, it's sort of just like, it does seem to me, this is going to be very controversial, and I'm probably going to get moaned at by everyone, but it seems to me that FIA have just gone, yes, the right thing to do is drop Mazepin, but we like his money, we'll keep him in.
Cynical as always, I see. Josh, how can I put this fairly? I want to say, Mike, it's not that everyone's disappointed in this room. I think Josh is a little bit on the nose with some things, but it's interesting to see, again, from a journalistic point of view, if nothing else. It's different to how other sporting governing bodies have treated their athletes. But at the same time, though, as you say, you've got to detract the sport from the politics. I would be interested to see how Haas run as an operation this year. For example, as you mentioned, the Mazepin's involvement with the team. Will there be Eurocali sponsorship on the car? Will it continue to have a neutral livery or a different livery altogether that doesn't involve Eurocali whatsoever? That will be interesting. I would suspect so, but. Of course, the question then comes, well, what is Dmitry Mazepin or Eurocali paying for, if not for their sponsorship name on the car? So I'm sure they'll find a way around it, or they'll probably. I wouldn't be surprised if there's sort of a Ferrari solution to all of this, and by that I mean Ferrari hasn't had Marlboro sponsorship for donkey's years, but at the same time, we all know where the Marlboro sponsorship sometimes presents itself on the car. So I will be interested to see how that plays out. Of course, it does become a case of whether this is a long-term feasibility or whether this is the team trying to make the best of a bad situation. The team has mentioned that it can financially support itself without Mazepin's money, and there might be finance coming from elsewhere, whether that be from the rumoured Andretti outfit that is supposedly making bids for Formula One, or from a third-party external sponsorship deal. We will have to see. But at the same time, but I will be very interested to see what the new Haas livery is by the time we reach Barcelona.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would think that Uralkali will be banned due to the fact that it's a Russian company, and the EU have sort of banned Russian companies. Most interesting for me is obviously where will Nikita Mazepin's funding come from, bearing in mind the sanctions that have been put on Russian banks, Russian money, Russian, companies can't withdraw funds, can't use funds in other companies, other countries. Because of this, I would like to know where Mazepin's funding will come from, and also where Haas's funding will then come from. Because if Mazepin can't use any of the money that he has been using so far due to the sanctions, will Haas keep... Obviously, he's racing for Haas, but how will Haas fund them this season? Because they'd have obviously been relying on Uralkali, that sponsorship deal that was worth a lot of money, that would keep them running racing all year. Now they can't use that. I would love to see, when it comes to Bahrain even, let alone the first race, where the money is coming from, whether they can still use Uralkali money, who knows. But Haas in the testing, going back to Barcelona, I was disappointed by them. After all this hype that had been built up, I mean, Connor, you couldn't come in a bit if you want. Obviously Haas, everyone expected Haas to be quite high up. What about you?
I think that we didn't expect them to be right at the front, but you are right. They should have been taking a step forward after their disappointment at 2021, just abandoning the season. I don't know. Again, we're all reading into testing times again, and it's very difficult to do that. But if we want to read into anything in testing, it's about how many problems the back five teams on the grid have. I noted that it was a very smooth test for the McLaren, the Ferrari, the Red Bull, and the Mercedes, and also notably the AlphaTauris. But there were consistent technical and reliability problems with the bottom five teams on the grid. Most notably Haas, that meant they didn't run at all in the afternoon of day 3 of testing. And that lack of running will seriously hamper them. We will have to, it's all speculation, because at this point of the season, it's very difficult to say, oh, well, it's completely ruined or it's out the door. But at the same time, though, this isn't the jump up the order in reliability that we expected. They will obviously have a lot of technology brought over from Ferrari, and I will expect them to be successful if Ferrari have been successful. But considering how Ferrari were the best reliable, had the best reliability of any team during testing, for Haas to struggle to get on top of a cooling issue on the final day suggests that they haven't quite perfected their car, and if they can't perfect this season, then that's a big omen for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, they only completed 160 laps. Compare it to Mercedes, who did 393. Obviously, that is a massive mileage difference for a team that have obviously, like everyone else, have got 2 new cars. The drivers obviously are learning these new cars. They were at the back last season, so therefore you'd have expected they've got the most development time, most wind tunnel time out of everyone. To then be not only at the back, but struggling with reliability and not doing that many testing laps, even though it is just a shakedown, remember, in Barcelona, you've got to, I would say, feel sorry for Mick Schumacher, but also feel a little bit annoyed for Mick Schumacher, because he's been promised this Haas car to be 2022 car, be the car, and the fact that it's not I think there's a serious issue there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit contrarian. We've gone to great lengths to emphasise that you can't read too much into testing times or mileage, which you can't. But by the same token, it's quite clear when something isn't quite right. You can definitely ascertain that much with Haas, and especially after the emphasis they placed on this year. And as you said, you've got to believe that poor old Mick was bimbling round at the back last year thinking, well, it's all right because Gunter's told me that next year's car is going to be a blinder. And here we are. Yeah, you do have to feel for him. And it's the situation we've got at the moment with only 10 teams on the grid. There's only so many seats, and it's just not cut and dried that you can get into Formula One into a car that's going to be competitive immediately. It's how many seasons. And well, George Russell, we already discussed George Russell is a perfect example of quite how long it takes sometimes for even a genuinely top talented driver to find their way into a top team. And it might just be another year or maybe even a few more paying for Mick. We'll see. Yeah,
I mean, Connor, obviously we know Mick Schumacher is really well established with Ferrari, and we know that Ferrari have plans with Mick in the future. Will Ferrari be slightly annoyed by the fact that Haas's development has not gone as well as maybe they were expecting, and hoping for Mick Schumacher to get some mid to front level to front field sort of action and experience to now be, I know it's only testing a shakedown and this could be completely different in the race, but as it's looking at the moment, it's looking like Haas will be once again at the back of the grid. Would you say that Ferrari might be a little bit annoyed with Haas?
I see your point, Josh. Although I can't imagine that's something they'll blame Mick for. Let's say if George Russell has proven anything, it's that you can get a drive in a top team while not driving for a top team. You don't have to be in a midfield car or an upper midfield car to earn your spot at the front of the grid. And I think Ferrari will be taking a page out the same book. You know, what is Mick doing compared to his teammate? What is Mick doing compared to those he can race against around him? And to be honest, if testing is anything to go by, I know Haas had a terrible time, but both Ferrari engine cars had so affiliate teams had a terrible time. Alfa Romeo was just, I'll be honest, this is journalistic opinion, but it was just awful. Bottas got barely any laps in. Guan Yu Zhou did the most of their laps, and there's only so much feedback a rookie can give you for that car. So I don't think he's going to be lonely at the back this year, Mick. And I will say, in terms of the times that Haas posted, their fastest time, set by Mazepin for reference, was actually faster than both Alfa Romeo's fastest times of Bottas and Kubica. Mick Schumacher managed to set a 1:21.9, which was slightly quicker than Mazepin's, but again, Guan Yu Zhou was only within a couple tenths of that. So I don't think it's a case of Haas being completely lonely at the back this year, but I think Ferrari will be perhaps more concerned that both of their Ferrari affiliate teams appear to be on the back foot as opposed to just Haas.
Yeah, I mean, Mick, this is obviously an issue that looks like it could be growing with Bottas, who has just gone from, well, we don't know whether he left or whether he was shoved out of it, but either way, he's left from a team that was battling for drivers and constructors, and even he was battling for drivers for most of the season. And they'll be sitting somewhere in a car that, again, doesn't look like it's going to do anything, let alone score any points. You've got to be seriously thinking that you've got to feel sorry a bit for Bottas for having to basically fall from the front to the back of the grid. But then as well, with Alfa Romeo only doing 175 laps, as Connor said, Ferrari are having a lot of issues with everything but their own car. But the testing, obviously, for Guan Yu Zhou, that was the main thing to get the mileage in. So Alfa Romeo have got a lot of issues, but you've got to feel sorry for Bottas to be not somewhere where he wouldn't expect it to be.
Yeah, it's probably not what he envisioned when he jumped in the Alpha. I'm sure he wasn't under any illusions that he was going to be moving towards the back of the grid, but he would also like to have seen a bit of a better showing so far, I imagine. But in my opinion, he may not necessarily need fast Alfa Romeo this year to try and get somewhere. You've got to remember, he's not that old. Valtteri's got a few years ahead of him yet, and he couldn't have just festered at Mercedes. That isn't, I'm sure, the way that he would have wanted his career to have carried on. It wasn't a good look for him, and he looked beaten at times, considering how much ability he showed. People forget, because he did manage to act like a complete wet wipe at times in races, but people forget how close he was coming to Lewis Hamilton in qualifying. That's a top tier driver, certainly in qualifying trim. Valtteri has got that talent, but he just needed to go to an environment where he could rebuild himself. And who's to say that, maybe it is a year or two of pain with Alpha, but who's to say that he can't find himself a more convenient move in future and work his way back up to the front of the grid? Because, people shouldn't write him off. He's not that old, and he certainly has got the talent.
I mean, Connor, is this Ferrari giving their two other teams, the customer teams, a slightly worse bit of kit to make sure that they're not up with Ferrari and make sure Ferrari are still the top Ferrari team? Because we know Mercedes don't do that. Mercedes give everyone the same thing. But was this Ferrari showing that what they've actually given out is not what they're using?
I think your Mercedes bias is showing once again with that statement, Josh. But I don't think so. I mean, if this was 2018 when they had that massive fall down the order, maybe I could be a little bit cynical and say, well, they'll try and keep the other two Ferrari power cars down just to make sure. But no, Ferrari are gunning for the championship this year. We're under no illusions that Ferrari are going to be holding anything back, or that they would want their affiliate teams to be held back. After all, if you're really fighting for a championship, you want an affiliate team up helping you. Look at how much AlphaTauri helped Red Bull in certain aspects last year, especially with Pierre Gasly. If you're Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc and you might have a championship chance this year, surely you want a Guan Yu Zhou or a Mick Schumacher there just in the background of the top 10, maybe to disrupt some pit stop strategies for some of your rivals, maybe to get out of the way when you're lapping them or whatever. You don't want bad blood with you and your affiliate engine teams. And so, no, I do not believe Ferrari are holding anything back for their cars. I'm very interested, though, to see, while we're on the Ferrari topic, Josh, let's move it on. But I'm very interested to see the aerodynamics with that Ferrari car, because the big scallop shape side pods are all very big and flashy, and I'm interested to see how they work. But the big thing I'm interested in is, where is that air from the front wing going? Because if you look at least the technical analysis that I read from Gary Anderson, a fellow journalist, he was very dismissive of how the front wing was affecting the airflow, because all of the air for the Ferrari car is very central focused, and it's going into the middle of the nose as opposed to washing outwards behind the front tires. And as a result, this means that a lot of the air is effectively stopping once it reaches the side pods. Their unique design doesn't allow for the airflow to flow easily around them, or to minimize the porpoising effect, as we saw. So yet somehow they're consistently putting in lap times. Somehow they are consistently being one of the fastest, despite the fact that their aerodynamics shouldn't work. From what we know about the car, their aerodynamics shouldn't work at all, but it is. So there's something about that car that we haven't seen yet. In the same way Brawn had the double diffuser idea in 2009, there is something about that Ferrari car that no one else has figured out yet, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
this is where we wait for Sky F1's coverage of Bahrain test and get Ted on the case, because we know Ted will find the answer. He always does. And that'll be answered as soon as Ted finds out about it. That'll be answered. But I get what you mean. It shouldn't work, but it does. The worry I had when I first saw that car, I immediately thought Baku, Monza, the high-speed circuits, that will not work in a lot worse than it does. Barcelona's not a high-speed circuit, but with high-speed obviously comes drag. With the way the Ferrari is done, it looks like it will cause a lot of drag. So the worry I have there is that it's going to be very slow around Baku, Monza, Saudi Arabia, that sort of thing. But it might be quite fast around Monaco and all these really tight, twisty circuits that we've got, like even Hungarian, Silverstone to some aspect. So what I was looking at was a potential that Ferrari have seen that they probably guessed they wouldn't be good at some circuits. So they did a bit like I did last year, where they surrendered the top speed for the ability to really perform on the slower speed circuits. So, Connor, do you think that could be one of the ways they've done it, where they're looking at Monaco, they're looking at some of these tight, twisty circuits and thinking, maybe we could focus the car on them and deal with the faster circuits when it comes?
Maybe, but there's not that many slow speed circuits nowadays in Formula One. I know. We can talk about Monaco to an extent and Hungaroring that are very much that, but beyond that, most circuits are middling speed, like Barcelona, or at least have a variety of sectors like we're going to in Bahrain. It's only, as you say, it's only really Saudi Arabia, Monza, and a select few others that would be the very top end speed circuits, and perhaps they are sacrificing those places, but this comes back slightly to how teams have fixed the porpoising issue, because the best way to fix that is to lift the ride height of the car, but in doing so, you make the car slower. So how much discomfort do you put your drivers under bouncing the car along the road, because it might be slightly quicker than raising it half an inch, just so you don't damage the underfloor of the car. And I think it does depend how crucial the underfloor of the car is for those teams who perhaps didn't work too much on the floor and focused more on the overhead aerodynamics. Then the porpoising is going to be a major issue, because there's nothing underneath the floor to smash. But as I alluded to, Ferrari have got something about that floor that no one else has figured out. Surely they don't want to smash that floor, because there's something there that we shouldn't know. And as a result, there's something they want to protect. And so, sure, I wouldn't be surprised if they sacrifice the high-speed circuits just to protect that floor.
Could I interject here? Sorry,
yeah,
Josh.
go on, Mike, please.
I'd just like to throw in the mix that how brilliant is it that we've got this porpoising issue? Isn't that for me, that is the summary of everything that we want from these new regulations, that the fact that, you put the most brilliant aerodynamic minds in the world to the test here. They've all put the work in, had a look at the regulations, nosedived into it and come up with their own solutions. They get out testing, and almost every single team has been surprised by the results. That is exactly what you want from a new set of regulations. And as you say, Connor, if Ferrari have found something, Braun-esque that the other teams have overlooked, again, that's just fabulous. That's just exactly what you want. You want that little cheeky innovation that a brilliant mind can find that someone else might miss. Is exactly what you want. When you work to a new set of regulations like this, it shows me that they've had exactly the desired effect. I'm really excited, and with the Ferrari, whether they found something different or not, I don't know. But But if you go with the old adage, if it looks fast, it is fast. And that, in my opinion, is the fastest Formula One car I've ever seen. I absolutely adore the look of that thing. Honestly, I've never been quite so excited at a car launch. I was just absolutely stunned by it. What a beautiful machine.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, Connor, about the fact they didn't want to smash that floor, it'd have been great to see some footage of the Ferrari going around Barcelona, because we'd have been able to see what curbs they were missing. Were they missing them all? Were the drivers actively trying to avoid the curbs, or were they riding the curbs? And that's what we'll see at Barcelona. Is what will the Ferrari drivers be told to do with the curbs at Bahrain, which we know the drivers like using, but we know they do destroy the cars. So you've got a mix there where if there is something on that floor that will make it vulnerable if it comes into contact too much, but at the same time it's doing so well with the aerodynamics of the car, will we see the Ferrari drivers staying off the curbs in Bahrain during the testing? And will that lead to potentially slower times because they're not using all of the track compared to some of the other teams? Another team that I was really surprised about and very disappointed about, well, two of them actually, were Alpine and Aston Martin, who last season were near the mid to front of the field. They're now not. Somewhere along the line, Alpine and Aston Martin are, I mean, even though Norris was sort of third, not Norris, what am I thinking of Norris's? But yeah, you see what I mean? It's like Aston Martin only completed 296 laps, which isn't that good compared to some of the other teams. And Connor, did you think that Aston Martin especially and Alpine were struggling with these new regulations?
Alpine especially. I'll go into Aston Martin in just a second, but if there's one team I was disappointed about massively this test, it was Alpine. Over the winter they've changed their management structure again after changing it again the previous season. They seem to be in a bit of a mess with their organisation at the minute. They had their problems at the end of the final day of testing that meant Ocon blew the car up on day 3 and Alonso never got out for the afternoon. And that's lost running. That's lost running for the team. They are running the BWT sponsorship this season. For those who aren't aware, they will actually be running the full pink design for the first 2 races of the season, then switch to this blue and pink crossover for the remainder of the season. So if anyone is curious about the Force India on track, then it's not that. Back to Aston Martin. Vettel was easily the star of that test for them, but yeah, there's again still problems with them. Again, like Alpine, they had a day 3 issue with smoke pouring out of the rear of the car, an oil leak I think it was in the end. It's niggling problems, and I'm sure they're problems that the team can easily get on top of, but considering how 5 of the teams basically went through testing without anything, to have another season where Aston Martin are again continuing to find technical issues is a concern. And it's not like their times were ecstatic either. But then again, I could argue it was only on day 3 that we had this one major issue, and they did complete day 1 and 2 without too much of a major hitch. So perhaps we will see from Aston Martin. Let's hope day 3 isn't synonymous for anything to come.
I mean, unless I'm wildly mistaken, the Aston Martin is basically a Mercedes again, as it was last season. Well, it's basically full Mercedes kit and all this.
I think they've gone very different this year because the new regulations mean they couldn't carry over the parts that they could for 2020 and 2021. That's the whole reason they copied, was to save costs. And yeah, if you look at how the car is structured, they're the big side pods that Aston Martin have, it's a very different car to how it was from the Mercedes clone of it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, Mike, just finally then, McLaren, they are looking strong once more. So, out of the Barcelona testing, would you say that they're in a quite good position to potentially do better than did last season?
Well, if you ask Mercedes, McLaren are the dark horses to be fastest on the grid. How much of that is just talking up the rivals and a bit of tactical ploy? I don't know, but they certainly didn't look like they were in strife. They were going well, and it's easy to forget with the doldrum years. The brilliant minds they got at McLaren, and the Honda engine deal managed to completely foil them during the last set of sort of really different technical regulations, although it did turn out that chassis wasn't particularly good anyway, no matter what they said about Honda. But they do have brilliant minds there in Woking. So, the big regulation change like this, you want to believe they've had the opportunity to advance on those top teams. And I don't think they will be disappointed with the way testing's gone for them so far. And I bet they're looking forward to Bahrain, get some more mileage and see just how capable this thing is, because we're looking, it's looking fairly open so far. You couldn't really call the fastest car, and no team has looked like stealing a march on the others either, which for a team that's nipping at the heels of the front like McLaren is probably exactly what they want to see. They won't have one particular rival just disappearing into the distance and leaving them. So it's looking very promising for McLaren, very promising.
Definitely. And then just a final question for you both then. Connor, I want your most impressive team and driver of Barcelona, and your most disappointing team and driver of Barcelona.
I think I've kind of already given it away, but in terms of my most impressive driver, I'm going to say Carlos Sainz, just for the fact he put in the most amount of laps, 236, I think he did on his own, which is more than I think all of, more than all of Alpine, all of Haas, and all of Alfa Romeo, which I think says a lot. Carlos Sainz for my driver of the test. He's been a bit of a dark horse, as they say, and he's very comfortable with that car. He was very good with that car last season, even beating Leclerc in terms of points. I'm very interested to see what he does in terms of teams. McLaren's got to be the team, because they're the only one that solved the porpoising issue. So it's got to be them, surely. In terms of disappointments, Alfa Romeo is my biggest disappointment. I'll be honest, I expected them to be a disappointment, and they have. I can't really say anything, but the team has run into massive technical issues and has just failed to put in the laps as a result. And in terms of a driver who's struggled this test, Valtteri Bottas, as he completed the least laps and barely got any proper testing in that car. And for a car he's never driven before, I'm sure that won't be that good going into the start of the season.
Just quickly though, Connor, do you think that Alfa were more focusing in Barcelona on getting Joe acquainted to the Alfa than Bottas, because they know Bottas has driven, Mercedes, driven all of these other cars, and and they expect Bottas to pick the car up so much quicker that Bahrain will give them, a massive amount of time to do that, and they just wanted Joe to get fully acquainted to the Alfa in Barcelona, so they don't have to focus him massively at Bahrain.
Maybe so, but if that was the case, he only completed 112 laps compared to many of the drivers who were competing about 150 average to 200. So yeah, if it was all about getting Joe some testing time, then it's resulted in him getting less testing time than the average. So,
well, there goes my theory, but hey ho, you never know. And then Mike, the same to you. So your best and worst driver and team.
Yeah, I think Connor's looked at my notes because that's exactly how I would phrase it. Carlos Sainz was just pounding in mileage, and that's exactly what you want. I know shakedown is a bit of an odd term, and how much of that is used to cover, as Connor said, the Bahrain wanting the share of the testing spoils. Who knows? But if you're going to call it a shakedown, laps is what you want, and that's exactly what they got in. And McLaren, you could probably tell when I was talking about them, the enthusiasm was bubbling over for me because I think they're looking really strong, and I am a McLaren fan. In terms of disappointment, it's sort of my answers aren't all exactly the same. I'm going to say Haas just because we were looking forward to that rejuvenation that they've been telling us for so much of last year that they were concentrating on the new set of regulations, and it just doesn't look like that's going to come sort of bear any real potential for this year. It's early, it's very early days to write them off and say, well, yeah, they're just not going to be there. But you want to think that things would have looked a lot more comfortable for them if they were really going to have achieved this supposed potential that they were harping on about all last year. And then driver, probably going to go for Nikita Mazepin because he seemed to take the lion's shares of the Haas problems, which limited his track time, and also just on the basis that it hasn't been the smoothest time for him over the last few days in a variety of ways. It can't have been an easy time for him.
That's fair enough. And then, so for me, in case anyone is sitting at home going, "Oh, what would Josh's question be? Will he be controversial?" Yes, is the answer to that. My best driver for me is Lewis Hamilton.
Shock.
Listen to this. Yeah, whatever. Right. Okay. The reason why is because he's had all this press focusing on him. Will he retire? Will he come back? Will he race hard? Will he give up? How will he move on from this? He has come in and he has posted fastest times after fastest times in a brand new car. It didn't look like it took him that long at all to get acquainted to the car. It looks like even the time off, he's been, no one's really heard a thing of him. He's ignored all the media. And I know that can really get into your head. All those, that can start doubting you. That can start making you think, well, hang on, are the fans right? Am I too old for this? Should I really be doing this? He's come out and basically said to everyone, I know I'm good enough. I know I'm right at doing this for another season. This is why. For the team, I'm going to go for Williams purely because they completed 347 laps. And bearing in mind, Williams lost Russell and have done all right, to be fair, in getting Alex Albon and then keeping Latifi. But they're in the top half of the classification. They've moved up a fair few positions and they've moved up ahead of the likes of AlphaTauri, Alpines, Alphas, that sort of thing. And Albon finished less than 100th of a second off Ricciardo in the McLaren. So that shows there is some promising performance in Williams. And this new setup they've got, which they took over from last year, looks like almost in Frank Williams' name is coming back to some sort of rejuvenation to what they used to be. For the opposite side of the scale, disappointing side, Lance Stroll, right? Purely because if there is a season to prove yourself, it's now. You've come in halfway through the old specifications. Granted, you could have struggled. You didn't like the setup of the car, you didn't like the car work. You've got a brand new car, brand new engine, brand new everything with Aston, yet you are still ridiculously slow. Lance Stroll should be doing better than he is. He should be somewhere up around McLarens and Ferraris, not sitting just above Mick Schumacher. In fact, racing less than a tenth of a second faster than Mick Schumacher, which is good for Mick Schumacher. But Lance Stroll, I mean, seriously, come on, man. Pick yourself up a bit. And for the most disappointing team, you'd have to go for the French. I mean, the Alpine, just what have they been doing over the winter? To have such a good car last season, which performed slightly out of its depth, but did all right, to then be struggling for 3 days in Spain, with all this. Maybe they're focusing too much on sports cars and not enough on Formula One, who knows? But whatever it is, they've got to sort it out, because that will not be good if you go to, say, Paul Ricard, their home Grand Prix, and they're sitting back in 18th and 19th position, getting beaten and lapped by everyone. So, I know it's only a shakedown, but Alpine should have done a lot more than it did. Final word from you, Connor, then, about Bahrain, obviously coming up next week, I believe, the testing.
10th of March. So, so 9 days time.
9 days time, then. Yeah. So a quick word, because obviously we'll go into it more detail next week. But what do you expect to see in Bahrain?
I expect to see some of the teams actually show their proper hand next week, and not fanny about with whatever they were doing this week. Alpine themselves sort of came out after the test and said they weren't running DRS the entire time as a way to excuse their lack of pace. But we will see with how everything goes. Perhaps, I don't know. Perhaps we'll see the McLarens and the Ferraris really show their strong hand. And I'm going to put predictions to say that Norris will enter the Bahrain test on top.
And Mike, to you, do you expect any of the teams and drivers that are sitting at the bottom of the field to have been slightly sandbagging, ready for the official pre-season test in front of the screens, in front of the media at Bahrain, that will then come out and perform massively well?
I don't know. I think the teams, certainly in terms of mileage, the teams that haven't got the mileage under their belts, that's genuine. That's genuine struggles, because there's no reason to hold back on mileage. And as far as times, I don't think anything we've seen is genuine, to be honest, so far. As I say, that there's a bit of a you can get a bit of a sense for when a team is really comfortable, a la Ferrari, Mercedes at this test. You don't have to be a social scientist to know that they're feeling all right about how things are going at the moment. And likewise, you don't need to be a genius to see that all's not quite well at Haas and Alpha. And so I don't think we'll see a huge difference. I don't think any team has. I don't think any team has performed or put the laps in a way that isn't reflective in some sense of where they're at, because the test time's too crucial at the moment with these new regulations. They can't miss mileage. If they have missed mileage, it's because things aren't right.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure we'll find out in 10 days or 9 days time. And of course, we'll look into it properly next week. So please tune in to the F1 show here on Motorsport Radio. But just to remind you guys, the breaking news, of course, was that Nikita Mazepin and other FIA racing drivers from Russia will be able to compete in the Formula 2, Formula 3, etc., but under a neutral flag. So they will not be supported by their country. They will not be able to support their country. Whether if they are on the podium or win, there will be a national anthem, or whether it will be like we saw in the Olympics with a piece of classical music being played, or whether they're like with that Russian ice dancer, they won't have a podium if a Russian driver wins. We are yet to find out. But yes, there will be Russian drivers on the grids in 2022, despite all this, but under a neutral flag. by all means, keep the conversation going, guys. What do you think of the Barcelona test, etc., on our social media, TikTok? Listen to us on Spotify, on Audible, whatever you want. We're on YouTube. I think we are literally everywhere. You cannot miss us. Join in next week, of course, to listen to us talk more about Formula One and more about testing in Bahrain as we look forward to the first televised test and the only televised test before the race. Thank you so much, Mike. Hopefully we haven't put you off too much, and hopefully we get to see you more on these panels, because you provided great insight, actually. It was great talking to you, and a great interview, of course. And, of course, Connor, as always, being the level-headed fellow that he is. But from all of us here at Motorsport Radio, good night.
This is Motorsport Radio. 1, 2, 3. Join the conversation. Contact the show on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website, Motorsport Radio.